I'm your host, Brandy Fleck, and this is Human Amplified. This is a show about our existence, our place in the world, what it all means, and ways to make it better. From big picture ideas that blow your mind to practical life advice, we explore it all. We amplify the voices of healers, survivors, mystics, disruptors, scientists, creatives, and everyday people like you and me to expand our consciousness and use that awareness to evolve into who we really want to be in the depths of our soul. Humans Amplified. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy this episode, please go rate and review the show. And remember to subscribe where you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Hey friends, research indicates that at least 70% of people in the US alone have experienced trauma. That means you've likely experienced trauma, and most of the people around you have too. Simply put, people need healing. I believe that as humans, we have the capability to alleviate the suffering that we all believe is so inevitable. But getting there starts with healing yourself first, with self-compassion, intentionality, time, and repetition. I have a free workshop to help with that. It's called Self-Healing the Root. It's a self-paced online version of some of the foundational work I do with my clients as a trauma-informed certified coach, and that I've also done to heal myself. It's designed to help you recognize and identify your specific nervous system responses and coping mechanisms to stressors. Then we build on that information to figure out the best ways you can regulate your specific nervous system responses when triggered. Then we create a plan that will help you integrate through action what you want for yourself instead. Healing these trauma responses can help you show up in the world more fully as who you really are. I want you to love who you are. And by the way, who you are is not your trauma or trauma responses. You can register for free at brandyfleckcoaching.com. Look for the free workshop option at the very top menu on the website. I'll put that link in the show notes if you're listening to the audio, or in the description of the video if you're watching on YouTube. But listen, this workshop is better suited for some than others, depending on where you're at in your trauma healing journey. Be sure to read the guidelines on the sign-up page before you register to help you decide if this workshop is for you. And if it is, I can't wait to see you there. Today, we're talking to Stephanie Dunn. She's a United Methodist minister who served for about 15 years before transitioning careers to become a certified life coach. She opened her private coaching practice, Stephanie B. Dunn Coaching, a little over a year ago. Now, before we go further in this introduction, here's some context for our discussion that you'll hear today. We recorded this conversation in April of 2024, so it happened right as the United Methodist Church opened its general conference to cover topics yet again, like same-sex marriage and LGBTQIA+ clergy. The Methodist Church has had well-known internal fissures around these issues, and NPR reports that up to 7,600 congregations disaffiliated because they disliked that many of the churches didn't enforce the ban on LGBTQIA+ marriage and clergy. In a landslide vote, the Methodist Church reversed its ban. That's a sure win for recognizing the humanity of others. All this to say that what you'll hear Stephanie and I talk about today, primarily burnt out clergy, is another symptom of a larger problem that's been going on for a while now. That is, institutionally, things are changing for the church. Not only are congregations leaving, but attendance numbers have been down for ages in many churches, not just the Methodist Church. And clergy women are leaving too. That's where Stephanie comes in. Once clergy herself, she now coaches clergy women and other helpers who are burnt out and looking for support, rest, self-esteem, and ways to fit into an institution that wasn't designed with them in mind. Stephanie has a unique perspective as an insider who left her traditional role, but took on an adjacent support role that's very much needed. So, whether you're clergy, a churchgoer, or are simply interested in how society is changing in all the various ways with human will behind the change, this is an honest inside look at where clergy is going, what they're doing, and what's next for the church as an institution and fabric of communities. Plus, learn how you can heal from burnout. Let's dive in. For the links mentioned throughout this episode, visit the show notes at humanamplified.com/episodes/118. Stephanie, a question I ask every guest who comes on the show is, what does being human mean to you?
Yeah, I love that question, and it feels like you could write a dissertation about what that what that means. I think that the way I understand it is it's hard for me to separate from my lens, my faith lens, and that's just that every human has sacred worth, and is created in God's image, and so we are all every human. To be human is to have inherent worth and value.
I love that. All right, everybody, let's welcome to the show today, Stephanie Dunn. Stephanie, I'm so excited for you to be here today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you. And how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. It's Monday. The weather is perfect here in Nashville. And so life feels good today.
Good. So before we dive into our full discussion, will you please tell listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I am a United Methodist minister, and I've served in local churches for about 15 years before stepping away. And I spent a couple of years after that thinking about what was going to come next. I had some wandering, both with an O and an A, wandering in, wandering time
Nice.
of where I would how I would spend my time vocationally after that. Then I stepped into coaching and I launched my business about a year ago. And it has just been a really beautiful shift for me. My work mostly is doing one on one coaching, uh, group coaching for clergy women addressing burnout, and a really fun space that I'm standing in right now for as far as coaching goes is that I'm a teen coach for a research project, which is so fun. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, just a tip of the iceberg. I'm married and have a couple of kids, and live close to Nashville's airport. So yeah, that's
Okay.
a little bit about me.
Awesome. Awesome. And so tell us a little bit more about your coaching and what inspired you to shift into that.
Over this past weekend, I was in a retreat series by the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is Parker Palmer's one of his projects that started years and years ago. And in that work, I found some old notes from 2019, which is probably when I started to sense that there was going to be a shift for me. And it was so interesting because in the note, I had said that I imagined eventually doing something where I could hold space with people and help them to live into their integrity and identify their values and live a life that comes out of that. And coaching was not on my radar at all. I didn't know anything about it. And it was at a Center for Courage and Renewal event that I learned that some of their facilitators also are coaches, and that in many ways, the work, their soul work that they really tap into is coaching for me. It's, holding space for people who have all sorts of questions, big and little, about how they can live lives of integrity and purpose. It's
Mm,
been a
I
good shift.
Yeah, I love that. And just so our listeners know, we actually met through the International Coaching Federation. We were both there as like new members, and it was like, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And then we just sort of like met up. And so it's been a really fun process getting to know you and sort of like having a coaching journey that's at a similar phase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it has been so rich, and so much of my life before coaching happened within a big, small circle that is the United Methodist Church. And it has been such a gift to break out of that. And you have certainly been one of those gifts. I tell all of my friends, did you know that trauma informed coaching is a thing and we need more of them?
Oh, yeah. Well, we need a lot of healing. But I do appreciate that. And I've appreciated getting to know you. And so that's awesome. You mentioned clergy and coaching like clergy women with burnout. What is important to you about focusing on clergy women?
I think that we clergy women, and in not just our world, but in the larger world too, are trying to function in a system that was never meant for us. Our systems, plural, were put in place at a time before women were in any of these roles, at a time when giving for a man, a single man, especially to be able to give 100% of himself was never probably reasonable, but it also has become less and less reasonable over time. And it's a community that I know and that I'm familiar with, and that I also have had the experience as a clergy woman in burnout. That particular community, holding space for them feels really natural for me. I love them very much and want for them to be well cared for in a way that is healing and affirming.
Yeah. Well, so some of our listeners may not know, but can you describe for us what the full role of any clergy person is? And because I think there's a lot that goes into it that we don't see.
Yeah, for sure. And that is that's such a good question. And it is almost impossible to ask, which is part of what makes it such a great question. Part of what makes it a great job is that in theory, your unique gifts, skills, abilities gets a chance to shine wherever you are. Some people are really great preachers, public speakers, and so they can really lean into that. Some people are really good at care, at showing up at hospitals and caring for people. Some are really good at organization. And so, in theory, each person would be given the opportunity to shine in different areas. The reality is that for most people, I think they're expected to be all of the things all at the same time with no growth spots. So, what you see in a weekly worship service is just the tip of the iceberg. There's some things that are just universally true, I think, for pastors, or at least are universal expectations, and that's that they attend to a community in a way that cares for the life cycle of a person. So we talk about it from cradle to grave. So being present for officiating at weddings and presiding at funerals and celebrating milestones and walking alongside families in their grief journeys. And as a part of that, I wanted to also be sure to mention this because I think it's important in our context today. As a part of the connecting to the community, it includes justice work. So showing up for people who in communities that are on the margins. And that can be particularly challenging in our charged environment.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. So there are a lot of aspects to this. And I mean, whole communities need to be taken care of spiritually.
Yeah.
Ooh. And not just spiritually, I guess. I mean, there's other stuff involved.
Yeah, yeah. One of the most sacred spaces that I've ever been able to hold was receiving a phone call to go to someone's mother's house who had unexpectedly died overnight, and it was in a senior living apartment, and everyone, understandably, in this space was really disoriented, and I was able to be sort of the neutral party. And as coroners were coming in and family members and friends were coming and going, I showed up in a body that looks like a young woman and that could just be somebody standing in a corner. But I am able to use the sentence, I am the pastor, and all of a sudden I have access to helpful information to be able to communicate. So it is so much more than 60 minutes on Sunday morning.
Okay. So then this leads into my next question, which is what is burnout? And is it the same thing as compassion fatigue? Because I know I hear that with other helping professions. So what's there?
Yeah. I think that is such a good question, because that is both of those are such important things. I don't think that they're the same thing. While compassion fatigue can certainly be a part of it, they can sort of overlap pretty significantly sometimes. Most of the ministers that I know experience the caring part of their work as the work that gives them the most life. And burnout, at this point, a pretty universally agreed on upon understanding is that there is prolonged, regular stress that's not been addressed. So there's a lack of support and care. So while the distinction between burnout and compassion fatigue can be fuzzy, I see a distinction. And so almost every pastor I know has had weeks where they have 3 or 4 funerals, just funerals you don't plan, they just happen. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden, you've got a funeral on a Saturday, a Tuesday, and a Friday. And so that's 3 additional sermons in addition to a Sunday sermon and working with families. And so and in the same regard, I don't know any of those people who haven't experienced compassion fatigue at the end of that week. And alongside of that, there are healthy recovery strategies where somebody can get the rest that they need to recover from their fatigue. Ashes to Art, are you familiar with them?
Mm-mm.
It's an organization out of Virginia, and their work is to engage with first responders in creating art as a tool for managing the trauma that they experience in
Ooh,
their
yeah.
work. Yeah, it's great, great, great work. And I think that that's a really great model for recovering from compassion fatigue, which feels more immediate, where burnout is much more of a prolonged experience.
Okay. And I love that you just brought up like recovery strategies, and rest is really important and actually necessary. And so that's one for fatigue. So you need more than just rest to recover from burnout.
Yes.
Is that?
Yes, yeah, you do. To the point about rest, the people who I know and who I work with, they don't experience burnout because of the 3 a.m. emergency phone calls. We have, in my group coaching, we have sort of started talking about it as the form of death by 1,000 paper cuts. So it's the person that's annoyed that you're not working on your day off, or the anonymous criticisms of how your voice sounds in the pulpit, or the unexpected 10 p.m. phone call from the fire alarm malfunctioning. So it's all of this sort of like, I'm on 24 hours a day and the expectations are consistently unclear, but always too high. And yeah, that's where burnout comes from.
Okay. I was curious, and I think you might have just hit on this, but like, why do clergy women in particular experience it, and how might that be different from someone in a corporate job? But if I understand you correctly, it's being on like 24/7 is the
Yeah,
root of it.
yeah, for sure. And that's true for all clergy. I think that clergy women face unique obstacles when it comes to burnout. First, it's just the patriarchy. Like I said, we're working in a system that was not built for us and hasn't adapted to work for us. Pastors, they endure a lot of behaviors in workplaces that in the corporate world, people would never, it would never be accepted in any other environment. I don't know a single clergy woman who hasn't had a congregant comment on their body. Mostly it's about weight. So I know, all of
What?
us. Oftentimes it's about what you're wearing, whether it's high heels or a sleeveless, not even a spaghetti strap, but just a sleeveless shirt because it's 95 degrees outside. So they put up with, they don't put up with it. They endure it.
Mm.
Just incredible comments. And our even our most well-meaning male colleagues, they just don't, that's not their lived experience. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they can really have a handle on what that feels like and what that experience is like. We're in the United Methodist Church, we're experiencing a very big shift in who we are right now. And there's the experiences of my female colleagues has been, I think it's been especially hard because they've had to navigate things different than our male colleagues. So, and that has been really hard.
It almost makes me think of like a split within a split, like there's lots of fragmentation going on, maybe, even though I think we all know about the main split that has happened. Okay, so I was going to ask you next, like, what can clergy women do to heal from burnout? But that seems like such a huge question. And let me just say, I had no idea that people felt so entitled to like comment on the bodies of clergy women. And why do you think people feel like it's okay to do that?
That's a really great question. And I don't have the answer. I think that, faith communities, anybody in theory is welcome. And people often show up not as their best selves, which means that they behave and speak in ways that it's not a professional environment for most people. So when they show up, they're in a different mode than they would be in other places. Imagine it being more like your kitchen table than a conference room table. So, which, we all have the family members who say things at the kitchen table that were like, oh my goodness, they're members of churches. they're in faith communities of all different stripes. And that's not to bash on faith communities. It's
Sure.
good that people have places that they can go when they are broken. I think that one of the struggles that churches have always had, and I'm assuming all faith communities have had, is that while everybody is welcome here, all behavior is not welcome here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have not done a very good job of making a distinction between those two things. That, they're you can't treat people that way, even if you've had a very bad day.
Right, right.
So yeah, gosh, it's so funny hearing, that just is such a assumed thing in our world.
We teach that to our kids. I say that exact thing
Right.
to our kids. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
There are really good people in churches.
Yeah, yeah. Not, yeah, absolutely. There are.
Also.
Yeah, yeah. There's good and bad experiences. There's good and bad behavior sort of everywhere we look. It's just this is in the context of what contributes to burnout and being able to adapt a system to the people who are part of it, I think.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And part of this work for me has been, when I stopped serving in the local church, that was one less clergy woman serving in the local church, which I'm happy for myself. And also very aware that that is something that I grieve. That so there's just a significant exit of clergy women. There's a significant exit of clergy, period. But women are especially moving on, which is really, I think of my kids are both, they're twin girls, and that makes me really sad for them that there are fewer and fewer women in the pulpit.
Yeah, that would, I mean, make sense that that would be sad because they will have less role models in those positions and things like that.
I will say that, gosh, they were probably 4 or 5 when one of them started using like her go-to pronoun for pastors was she. I was like, score, big win.
That's cute.
So there's still time.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot into recovery strategies and healing. I know you mentioned rest earlier, but what are some other things people can do, or clergy women specifically can do to heal from burnout?
Yeah, I think that a starting point is to get to a place of psychological safety. And so for some people, that will mean strengthening boundaries while they stay in their context. And kind of to the point that we were just talking about, for some of them, that's going to mean stepping away from the local church, which is both of those are hard. I mean, burnout is hard. Recovery from burnout is really hard. I'm sure that you've talked about this on here, but when you're stepping out of burnout and or trauma, your body responds, and all of a sudden, people notice that they're sick and their blood pressure spikes. And so burnout is hard, and the coming out of it is not a cakewalk either, because you have to start making decisions that address things that have been going on for a long time. And it's really hard. So getting to a place where you feel safe in all of the ways that means. Also, in terms of healing from burnout, I think you've got to establish a professional community of support that would look like, for many, if not most people, I would say finding a mental health provider that you connect well with. For some, that could mean finding a spiritual director. For others, that could mean finding a coach, finding a trauma-informed coach who can help you move forward. Yeah, so I think those are sort of a professional support system, and being in a place that you feel emotionally and physically safe are sort of the key things that you need to sort of step outside of it, go through the tunnel of your feelings to get to the other side.
And I think it's really important to note that you've sort of, and I don't think you said it directly, but you've sort of coupled burnout with trauma, because in a lot of ways it goes hand in hand. Like when you're experiencing the feeling of burnout, it is your body experiencing like trauma responses, and your nervous system is dysregulated. And so it does take a lot of time to undo that. And I love that you mentioned psychological safety as a first step, and that can be really difficult.
Yeah. You've learned your whole self, your body, your brain, your emotions have all learned to regulate in an unhealthy place. And so to recover, you're having to change your whole makeup, really.
In your group coaching with clergy women, what are you finding that people are doing for psychological safety? Like in your groups, are they leaving? Are they just figuring out better ways to exist in the system?
I would say that it's mixed. I think there are boundaries that people are establishing boundaries. One of the things that comes up a lot is attaching a Y to your nose. Even if your no is, I will be taking 2 weeks of vacation because I'm a human and I need to recover. So just even if it sounds not super important to some, being able to attach a Y to your boundaries is a way of creating safety around yourself. You're taking some ownership and having some agency in what it takes for you to be healthy and whole. There's a lot of learned helplessness. Many of us, myself included, I have a bachelor's degree in religion and a master of divinity. And so we kind of get stuck in this thing of like, oh my gosh, I have no other skills. I really need this job. For a lot of people, their job comes with housing. So if I don't have this job, then I don't have a home. And so a lot of the work is, I would say that one of the strongest parts of coaching with this particular group is identifying where you have agency and leaning into that and celebrating it. So it's, for most people, I would say it's baby steps. For some, it's a major life shift.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. That to me sounds like healing trauma. So it's really
Yeah.
cool that you brought up agency and like empowering people to make choices where they can and to do what they can. So yeah, I feel like that's a good takeaway for our listeners. And
Yeah.
on the other hand, how can people prevent burnout in the first place?
Yeah, I think this gets to the rest point that has popped up over and over again. One of my cousins, she modeled something for me so well in her parenting. When one of her kids is getting really upset, she'll ask 3 questions. Have you had anything to eat? Have you had anything to drink? And do you need to take a nap? I think those are such good questions for all of us. Like, what's my food intake like? Have I drank enough water today? And do I just need to take a rest?
Such basic things, but we forget to do them. Yeah.
We do. And so those are three of them. I also think that moving is so important, which is that truthfully for me is probably the hardest one, because when I am in a stressful place, like that's the first one to go. I am good at resting. When I'm having a hard time getting out of bed, can be really hard. And also, we know that that's how we close our stress cycle. Our bodies must have movement. But I think that it's important for people to know. So much of my stuff on burnout, just to throw a resource out there, comes from Amelia and Emily Nagoski's burnout book on burnout. They use the image of somebody being chased by a lion as sort of how you close that stress cycle, and that you have to move your body for it to be complete. So there's moving, there's also breathing, which I'm not going to get it right, but there's a number about how many breaths in a minute are good for us to aim for a good healthy body. And then and then there's the number that most Americans get, which is like dramatically lower than like what our bodies could really benefit from. And so we're all just kind of walking around hyperventilating all of the time because we're not feeding our body enough oxygen. Yeah, so breath work is so important. Social support. One thing that I say in our groups is in part of one, I think it might be the fundamental goal of those groups, and that's to strengthen your community that prioritizes your care and your well-being. So people who, it's not going to be the person who's upset with you for not being there on your day off. It's the person who's going to be upset with you because you were there it's like, are you taking a comp day? Are you, some just people who really, more than anything, they see your humanity and they want you to be healthy in your humanity. One of my, actually the person who helped me sort of discern my path forward towards coaching, she put in the bottom of her emails for a while, be patient with me. I'm moving at the pace of being a human, which I just think is a great way to close an email because I'm terrible at getting back to people on time. Unless it's coaching related, and then I'll get back to you super fast, guys. But I thought that was just a really smart way to sort of shift a very practical thing, emails where people sort of expect immediate responses, to say, remember, there's a human behind this, and I'm moving as fast as a human can.
Mm-hmm. And
slower some days than others.
Yeah. I really love how you differentiated between a supportive person as someone who sees your humanity and wants you to like rest in it or do what you need to do because of it, and the non-supportive person, because I think we take for granted sometimes that we know what that means, and then we find ourselves without support. And maybe we do this to people too. Like lots of us probably have these expectations that don't necessarily support our humanity. So that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me shift to a more general question and just say, how can helpers in general honor being helpers while also taking care of themselves?
Yeah, I think that it's all of those things that we said. And also, it's honoring your humanity. Helpers have a tendency to start to count their days of the hour differently than people who are not helpers, that there are 24 hours in a day. So surely I can attend to all of these needs. And you don't have 24 hours a day to attend to the needs. I heard a really great stat recently that people have about 3 hours a day of max productivity, and that it's helpful for you to kind of identify what your block of time is. So helpers often fall into the fallacy. They fall into the trap that I do have 24 hours a day to work with to meet all of these needs, and the list is never ending. And in that, they begin to deny their humanity. So a way for them to take care of themselves is to be a human. And that comes with all of the like really incredible things that we're all capable of, but it also comes with acknowledging that you are limited in your capacity, just like everybody else. And that when you begin to feel burnout creeping in, you go back to the, have you had anything to eat? Have you moved your body? Do you need to take a nap? So just sort of listening to your body and honoring what it is telling you.
Gosh, again, going back to those basics of just like basic humanity, but things that we don't typically do as a society, I think. And it takes me back to your first response to what it means to be a human too, with our intrinsic worth. And it's like, to take care of yourself and to honor yourself in that way, you have to be able to see that worth. Do you notice a lot of self-worth or like low self-worth coming up with your clients?
Yeah. And I think that goes to the like, this is all that I can do. Like, I have no other skills, no transferable skills. And also, one would hope that in this work, there's a strong sense of purpose. And it's really easy to get bogged down in just sort of the weeds and feel like you're losing your sense of purpose. And I think that contributes to the lower sense of self-worth. We all kind of go into it feeling like we have all these ideas for what our work will look like. And that's true, I think, for all people pursuing something that takes a long time to get there, that there's the image of where you're going. And then you get there and you're like, I'm not sure that these things match, which is completely normal. And also, it can leave you wondering how you got there and what your value actually is to the world, to the people in your community, to yourself. So yeah, I would definitely say that that's something for this community to work on.
Well, and it's interesting that you brought up the skills, the non-transferable skills. And I feel like, ooh, there's got to be some way for the skills to transfer. Do you have any ideas like where is a next step?
I love coaching clergy women through that because I certainly was in that experience, that trap for myself. And coming out of burnout, the work that gave me a path forward was sitting down and thinking, okay, what do I enjoy doing? What do I feel like I'm really good at and that can work in multiple settings? And I did chapel for our preschool, for the preschool at the church where I served for a long time. And that was probably my favorite part of every week. And the power of that work that I saw was that I got to be part of creating a space that felt inviting and affirming and special to each kid. And I've found a way to be able to do that in another setting. And that has just been, I feel like I get to do chapel with preschoolers that are grown-ups every time I get to coach.
That's awesome.
And so for clients, that looks like doing work with the inner critic, having some good conversations with that voice that we all have in our head. It looks different, it sounds different, but we've all got it. And sometimes we've got to figure out how to transform the face and voice of that critter that lives in our head. Mm-hmm. And for other people, it means befriending that inner voice and then kind of stepping outside of ourselves. And, how would you have this conversation if you were outside of yourself? If you were talking to a friend and they said, I have no transferable skills, what would you say to that? And what would you help them identify? So the self-worth piece is so tricky. And nobody shows up in the world without
right.
without that. And there are tools and skills that we can develop and lean into that help.
Good. Well, hopefully that gives some people out there hope if they're feeling burnout, and that there are, if you're feeling like you need to make a change in your life, it is possible to make a change and look at your skills from a different perspective. Let's pivot back to the actual church. We started talking about it a little bit in the beginning, but I know that I've heard that church numbers are dwindling. So I would love to get your take on why that is, and is it connected in any way to what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't, it is not a secret that that's the case. Like there are so many different directions that to go with this. So if I am a little bit squirrely, help me bring it back to
Okay.
whatever is helpful. There is a sense of yes, we know that that's true, and we know that this is our future, and also let's panic and try to fix all the things. It's not a new issue. Church membership has been in decline for decades, for all of my life. So it's not anything new. The panic about fixing it is not new. What I am saying in my clients is that they know that and they understand that. And really there's even a sense of it's okay. Like it's not like I wasn't alive then, but I don't think that there were a lot more people who were living lives of integrity and faithfulness, whatever that looks like, in the 1950s than there are today. I just, if anything, hopefully there are fewer country club churches. I hate to use that phrase in a public platform, but
I've never heard that phrase.
oh, for sure, it's a status symbol.
Okay. Okay.
It's attending a church that is a status symbol church where people of influence would be going there, and so it's a connection point. It's a way to network.
Gotcha.
So, which is fine. And also, people are finding other ways to do that in a way that doesn't connect. My hope is that church is a place where people connect to their faith, and all of the other stuff is peripheral rather
Mhm.
than being motivated by that. So, I am not bothered by attendance decline. Most of my clients are not either. What is really hard, there are some parts of it that are really difficult. Something that, and I meant sort of alluded to this earlier, the decline of clergy is really troubling, I think, for me and for most of my clients. I think that it feels like support is being lost as people are leaving. They're going to do other things. So the community of support is getting smaller, and that's really hard. People are also this. For some people, I'm sure that this will come across as gross, but people are worried about job security. If there are fewer members, then it's going to be harder for people to find positions.
Well, that's a
Um,
legitimate concern.
so
Yeah.
yeah, for sure,
You got to make a
it is,
living.
and also indeed you do.
Yeah.
So in my tradition, we have had it's one of the big mainline churches. We've been able to have full-time positions in large number for a really long time, and we're having to start thinking more towards people being what we would call bivocational, so being a minister of a church and having a second job, which will be a really interesting thing when it comes to clergy burnout. How are we going to navigate that, because it also is a not so secret that, like, we often hire in churches for part-time positions that you're getting paid for 20 hours a week, but you're working 40 to 50. So that will be a hard shift for pastors and congregations, because that's going to start happening more and more for sure. It's a
Okay.
good question.
I'm not sure if it's clear if it's related in terms of like the burnout's not causing dwindling numbers. It's almost like the dwindling numbers are somehow contributing to the burnout, but also the system not necessarily adapting to the people who are in it, maybe?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the generational shifts. And right now there are multiple generations around the table, and I would say this isn't, these are all just stereotypes and assumptions based on like how things generally are. But I would say that for older generations who are still serving, there's frustration with younger people for not just, I'm going to put this in quotation marks, sucking it up, because that's just the nature of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't, that they're not coming from a place of, they're not intending to do harm. They just see that as how they handled themselves and their work. And for younger people, there's a sense of I'm just not going to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So they're much more comfortable walking away than older generations have been, and that's for all sorts of reasons. Sort of to get to the benefits thing, we have in my tradition we have pretty good retirement plans that are shrinking, and so a lot of older folks are like, well, at least there's good retirement, and younger people are like, not for us. So yeah, there are just some really different assumptions that the different generations are making. And again, that's very broad and isn't universally true, but
My mind wants to be like, so do you think the church is going to last? And I know that that would be that would be like so hard to speculate on. So I will just leave that out there if you want to speculate on it. But also, do you have a vision for what you would like the future of the church to be and how it can incorporate wellness and adapt?
really good questions and ones that are happening every day around church staff lunch tables.
Okay.
I don't know, and this is pretty crude. I don't care. Um, I I believe. I mean, my belief is that God is faithful, and that that God has always been at work, regardless of institutions or humans' activity. I don't think that it is anyone's job to save the church. I believe that God is faithful, and that's just my own sort of take on it. And with the understanding that I think of people whose entire livelihoods are wrapped up in like the survival of this thing, and so if the church were just going to go away, it would not be without a lot of grief. What would my hope be for the future of the church? I mean, there are so many different ways of thinking about the church, like institutionally and local communities, and yeah, so there are so many different ways of thinking about it. My hope is that we would model what it is to have a rich understanding of what it is to be humans. And that goes back to the inherent worth, sacred worth, image of God that when we see our neighbors, that we see them as full humans that should be held and cared for, every one of them. That would be my hope. And I'm afraid that we're missing lots of really big opportunities to do that. And alongside of that, I mean, in my own geographic area of Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky, we are having conversations with pastors who are providers, mental health providers, coaches, chaplains, about how we can care well for one another. So all hope is not lost. And also, there's a lot of work to be done on ourselves, mostly, and in the world.
Thank you for sharing that answer. I feel like it's really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for offering it. Yeah, like I said, today there were probably thousands of people having that conversation around. Well, actually, yeah, I will say that starting today, the United Methodist Church is having a global meeting that lasts 2 weeks, and in theory happens every 4 years. But COVID put us off our schedule, and so it's a really stressful time for a lot of United Methodists who are sitting around and asking these exact same questions in a very formal setting.
Gotcha. Okay. See, and
Yeah.
I like for our everyday listeners, I didn't know that. Like lots of people probably didn't know that. So that's really interesting that,
Yeah.
it's happening. It's a thing that people are talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And where can our listeners find you and your work?
I have a website. It's www.stephaniebdunn.com. Interestingly, there is a Stephanie B. Dunn coaching.com, and that is not me. And
Oh,
I've looked at her website, and she is from California, and she's International Coaching Federation certified. So I'm sure she's a great coach, but mine is stephaniebdunn.com. I also have a presence on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So yeah, and on my website, there's more information about my coaching groups, which the registration is open for the fall groups. I also am curious about how that work could translate into other communities of people who are helpers, nonprofit leaders, and that sort of stuff. So if anyone is interested and curious about how that could look within their context, I would be so happy to get to work with people in other settings too. So clergy women are my heart, but I also have a lot of fun with all sorts of people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, guys, all of those links and even the resources that Stephanie mentioned throughout this discussion will be in the show notes for you to go check out. And so be sure to do that. And Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good conversation.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out more of our episodes here and at humanamplified.com. Remember to subscribe.